So we will, so we shall start. And as you know, we are recording the lecture. I put the record because then we put it on our site later on. So good evening to everybody. This is our first public lecture for this year. As you know, in the chair we have created the traditions of having some 3 lectures normally in a year. One in the beginning of the academic year. Sometimes the second one would be in this year would be either in March or April, and then we'll have another one by the end of the academic year. And I'm very happy to open the year with the lecture of Nejati, Dr. Nejati Alkan, a very good friend of the chair and of the Baha'is and our community of knowledge. Just for those among you who might not have seen me before, I just introduce myself in a word. I'm Meir Barasher from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Department of Arabic Language and Literature. But since a bit more than 4 years, I am the incumbent of the chair for Baha'i Studies at the Hebrew University that was founded about 24 years by my colleague, Professor Moshe Sharon, and I took over some 4.5 years ago. We have had a very successful workshop last year on prayer in religions, not only in Baha'i religions, but Baha'i was at the center, but other monotheistic religions were involved in this international workshop that was very successful. And we plan to publish the results of the proceedings in a form of a book, on a monograph on prayer in the next, let's say, 2 years, until we collect the material and elaborate them and then put them into a book. So let me just introduce briefly, and I also want to let you know that we have with us in the public, we have Uval Abramovitz, who is the new coordinator of the chair. He replaced Yoav, who was in the job until 2 months ago, and before him was Eitan, whom you all know because he worked since the beginning of my cadence until a year ago at Anishai. So Dr. Nejati Alkan, who is not a new face in this framework, he had lectures when we had 3 years ago a series of online lectures on Baha'i religion. He gave us 2 lectures, and we have also met him in other occasions here in the chair, and also in other lectures. In at least once he lectures in the Meisai conference, which is held every year. So Dr. Nejati Alkan specializes in the history of the late Ottoman Empire. His main focus is on religious minorities, especially non-Sunnis. He has been extensively publishing about the Ottoman sources on the Babi and Baha'i religions. He has published the monograph Non-Sunni Muslims in Late Ottoman Empire, State and Missionary Perceptions of the Alawis. This is another field of his expertise. The Alawis, the minority of the Alawis, who were in power until recently in Syria. So he wrote a monograph on them, which I'm very much enjoying reading. I'm about to finish its reading. Very, very, very important monograph. I'm showing you the book here. He is currently working on numerous Ottoman archival sources to complete what he began in his revised PhD thesis entitled Descent and Heterodoxy in Late Ottoman Empire, Babis, Baha'is, and Reformers. Nejati is also planning a book about the Baha'i community in the Republic of Turkey. And today he will be, and I have to mention that he also served, like many devoted Baha'is, at the center in Haifa, the Baha'i World Center, for a couple of years. Yes, Nejati, you have been there for a number of years, yes? He was also in a postdoctoral year at the Hebrew University, if I even more than a year. 1 year, okay, 2 years, 2 years. I do remember this. And today he will be lecturing on the topic, the early beginnings of the Baha'i faith in Turkey. So the floor is yours, and you have time until say around 7:30, an hour or about an hour. Then leave, please, half an hour, and then I'm stopping my words here, and then the chairing will be continued by Holly, who will take over the questions from the public and lead the discussion in the second part of the evening. So please, Nejati.
Thank you very
تفضل.
much. Thank you. Pleasure to be here again with you. So today I'm making the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic. And Nesrin was just saying, I have always something new to present. And in fact, I think most of what I'm going to present is really new, even for Turkish Baha'is. So, it's a work in progress, so bear with me. It's not, it may be not very detailed, but so I will try my best. In any case, so when I mean Turkey, the Baha'i community in Turkey, I of course refer to the present Turkey, like modern Turkey. Even when I talk about the Ottoman Empire, Turkey is like the borders of modern Turkey. So, and Turkey is the third country, if I'm not mistaken, after Iran and Iraq that had Baha'i communities from early on, from the time of Baha'u'llah, in fact. Let me share my screen with you. Wait. No, that's not it.
No,
I'm sorry.
Where can I sit?
Well, you sit here and I'll get a stool.
Yeah.
So, you see my...
Sit here and I take the stool.
Sorry. Let me just...
I switch on.
Something's going wrong. I'm really sorry. So I hope I have the full screen now. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So as I said, Turkey is one of the earliest countries which had Baha'i communities. And in fact, the first believer who set foot on Turkish soil was the second believer in the Bab, Mullah Ali Bastami, a letter of the living, and the first martyr, in fact, in Baha'i history. So after the declaration of the Bab, as you know, there were 18 letters of the living, the first believers in the Bab, and Bastami was sent by the Bab to Ottoman Iraq to proclaim the cause of the Bab, mainly to Najaf and Karbala, where he was arrested and sent to Baghdad for trial. And from there to Istanbul, via the city of Bolu in northwest of Turkey, east of Istanbul. And Mullah Ali Bastami was exiled to Istanbul and died there in late 1846. So that was the first believer to ever set foot on Turkish soil. I will mention a few Iranian believers who resided in Turkey, but which did not result in Baha'i communities. Just to give you an overview of that. We know that Baha'u'llah, of course, spent 5 years in present Turkey and within the borders of modern Turkey, being exiled from Baghdad to Istanbul to Edirne, altogether around 5 years, where he passed many cities in Turkey and which are held in high esteem by Turkish Baha'is, especially Istanbul and Edirne. Among other Iranian Baha'is who from early on settled in Turkey was another letter of the living, the only one who became a Baha'i to live long enough to accept Baha'u'llah. He settled in Istanbul and died there. And then we have Nabil ibn Nabil, who also settled in Istanbul and established some business, and who served the faith by assisting pilgrims en route to Akka. But he was accused by followers of Mirza Yahya of business corruption and other slanders. And so in the end, he committed suicide and died in Istanbul, which is mentioned in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf by Baha'u'llah. And his grave is at the Shia cemetery in Istanbul. We have other Iranian Baha'is in the late 19th and early 20th century. Iranian Baha'is appear as travelers, merchants, and pioneers in several Turkish cities, to some of which I will refer in detail. So we have actually 3 cities in the southeast of Turkey, or 4 cities: Gaziantep, Birecik, Iskenderun, and Adana, and then 1 city in central Turkey, Aksaray, and of course Istanbul, where there have been Iranian Baha'is all the time. As to the sources I'm using, there are 4 memoirs by early Turkish Baha'is about early Baha'i communities. I will come to them in some detail later. We have letters and tablets by Abdul Baha in Persian and Turkish, which he sent to Baha'is in Turkey, and also letters by Shoghi Effendi in Persian and English, in Persian to the Baha'is and in English, talking about events in Turkey. And we have references in Baha'i journals like Star of the West and other Baha'i magazines and bulletins. We have official archival sources in Turkey, in Istanbul and Ankara, and also mostly Turkish newspaper articles about the Baha'i communities in Turkey. So one of the earliest, earliest in the sense that developments took place in Turkey, is this short memoir by Baha'i Cemil Bilecen about the city of Antep, or Gaziantep, in southeast Turkey, where actually the first Baha'i community was established in the 19th century. And then we have another important Turkish source by another early Turkish Baha'i from the city of Birecik, also in the southeast of Turkey, which is also partly oral history and mostly his own memoirs, describing the history of the cause in Birecik. This was published by his son in 2010. So after around 50 years, we were deprived of his memoirs, and now, thank God, we have his detailed account of this Baha'i community in Birecik, which basically starts from his conversion to the Baha'i faith in around 1912-13 up to 1932. And then we have memoirs of his daughter, Zerrin Anteplioğlu, which is also a personal and oral history, and almost repeating the same things. And then another book is this called The Baha'is in Turkey by another early Turkish Baha'i, which has the development of Baha'i communities in various cities. And this is also mostly based on oral history. So the first native Turkish Baha'i is this gentleman you see on the right, Çelebi Akkaş, or Akkeş, as it is in the local dialect. So Akkeş Effendi was basically how he became a Baha'i. We are told that in 1872 or 1875 he visited his maternal uncle in Egypt, who had some high-ranking military, was a high-ranking military there, and Akkeş Effendi stays for about 4.5 years in Egypt, where he receives education in madrasas, and then hears there about the Baha'i faith from an Iranian, after which Akkeş Effendi visits Baha'u'llah in Akka in around 1880, I think, and stays about 3.5 months and returns as a confirmed Baha'i to Antep, to his native city, where he teaches the faith also to his father, but the father first opposes and then visits Baha'u'llah later and also becomes a Baha'i. We are told that Ökkeş Efendi had 4 sons and 3 daughters, and 2 sons were prominent Baha'is, Nuri Çelebi and Mecdi Çelebi, and they later took both the last name of Inan. So Mecdi Inan is very, very well known in Turkish, among the Turkish Baha'i community. I will come to him in a brief while. This other son, older son of Akkaş Efendi, Nuri Çelebi, was a famous poet of Antep and an active Baha'i in various capacities. After 1921, he was active in Aleppo, which was at that time under French mandate. He went there with his brother Mejdi, and they served there at the local spiritual assembly for some years. And on the right, you see a tablet of Abdul Baha rejoicing about the marriage of Nuri Bey, Nuri Çelebi. Mejdi Inan, as I told, he is very well known, and the Turkish community, Baha'i community, owes him very much because he translated many writings of Baha'u'llah and also of Abdul Baha into Turkish, starting in the 1930s up to the 1960s. So he knew Persian and Arabic very well. As I told you, he was active also in Aleppo for some time. And then in 1926, he settled to Istanbul to work at a firm where he also served at the local spiritual assembly, which was arrested in 1928. This is an episode I will share with you at the end of my talk. Mejdi Inan was also the translator of Eslamon's famous book Baha'u'llah and the New Era, which was published in 1932. But in the wake of the persecutions of the Baha'is, this book was prohibited in that year, in 1933, I think. And Mejdi Çelebi later served in the newly elected LSA of Istanbul in 1951. So the first Baha'i community, as I said, was in Gaziantep, and we are told that 3 Iranian Baha'is went there during different times. The first one, called Haji Wahab, a merchant from Azerbaijan who came to Antep in 1866, and then a certain Sheikh Abul Qasim from Burujerd, who met Baha'u'llah in 1877 and was told to go to Antep and settle there. And then the third one was a certain Haji Shams from Hamadan, who visited also the Holy Land in 1888 and met Abdul Baha, who also told him to settle in Antep. So apparently these Iranian Baha'is were the ones who introduced the faith in Gaziantep, or in general, like, were the cause for the establishment of the first Baha'i community. This is one of the early photos of the Baha'is of Antep from 1913. In the middle, you can see the first Baha'i Ökkeş Efendi, and another photo of the Baha'is of Antep in around 1930-32. Another early Baha'i was Abdul Kadir Direöz, who was from the town of Birecik. He just attended the primary school there, but he tells in his book that he taught himself Arabic, Persian, and some French, and also translated Baha'i writings, several ones, and also his memoirs about the Baha'i faith in Birecik. So, and he says that the first Baha'i of Birecik was a certain Olbe Yusuf, who, via Iranian Baha'is on their way to Akka, heard about the faith, and Abdul Kadir Direöz, the one you see on the photo, says that he became a Baha'i in 1912-13 through Baha'is with Bektashi background. So Bektashis were a dervish order active in the Ottoman Empire, at some point prohibited in the early 19th century, and because of seemingly subversive activities. But the Bektashis are a I would say, a dervish order with Shi'i leanings, very liberal dervish order, and they are the organized form of the Alevis actually in Turkey. So we also learn from this book that there were in Baha'is in Birecik at least since 1906. Abdul Qadir Diryas was a public officer in Birecik and other cities, and at some point after World War I, when Mustafa Kemal, the later Ataturk, began his national independence movement, Abdul Qadir Diryas was one of those who, as public officers, supported this movement and was later decorated for this. We are also told that some Baha'i dervishes were active in spreading the Baha'i faith in Turkey, especially one or two of them, which are also mentioned in Persian sources. Here you see some Baha'is of Birecik from 1906 with their names behind the photograph, and then another photo of Baha'i youth of Birecik and Antep from 1910, I think. And the ones with the arrows, the one below is an Armenian Baha'i who apparently also was one of the first translators of the writings into Turkish. And then there are two brothers, Nuri and Mejdi Çelebi, who I just mentioned. We have also some tablets of Abdul Baha in Persian and Turkish, I think, to the Baha'is of Birecik. The right one you see in the handwriting of Abdul Baha. There are also Western Baha'is we encounter in the early 20th century in Istanbul. One of them was one of the first American Baha'is, Charles Mason Remy, who visited 1908 Istanbul after the Young Turk revolutions and mentions some Oriental Baha'is in Istanbul. And then we have, of course, Stenmud Kopp, a famous Baha'i educator who between 1907 and 1910 actually was teaching at the Robert College in Istanbul, a missionary school, and then later also visited Abdul Baha in the Holy Land in several books, among which is the book called The Real Turk. He mentions also the Baha'i faith and his experiences in Turkey. And then we have Martha Root, the famous travel teacher, who also visited Turkey several times in 1927, 29, and 1933. And her accounts are also published in one of the Baha'i World volumes. Abdul Baha has some Turkish tablets also to Baha'is in Istanbul, one of which is a certain Nazim Bey. I think he was a physician. There is at least one or several Turkish tablets to this gentleman, and then we have at least 3 Persian tablets to Baha'is in Istanbul from 1919, where Abdul Baha encourages them to promote the faith in Istanbul. In 1922-23, we read in the Star of the West, in Constantinople, notwithstanding the lack of teachers, a great number of Turks, Armenians, and Persians have become attracted to the Baha'i cause. For the first time in history, the members of these 3 races are united in one faith. So I'm not sure about the great number of Turks, but there were certainly Armenian, Turkish, and Persian Baha'is in Istanbul at that time. In 1919, we have a photograph here of Baha'is in Istanbul taken in 1919. We have mostly Iranian or say Azeri Baha'is, like as Baha'is say pioneers in Istanbul, and 4 of them are native Turkish Baha'is, which I marked here on the photo. And about one of them, the first one about Emin Ali, I will just talk briefly because he was important for the course of Baha'i history in Istanbul. So this Emin Ali Bey was the Turkish legal representative at the Joint Tribunal of Arbitration and the Lausanne Peace Conference in 1922 to 23. The Lausanne Peace Conference was actually decisive for the newly to be established Republic of Turkey, because there the current borders of modern Turkey were decided upon. And so this gentleman was apparently influential in that conference. He was later identified with the Baha'i religion and the group of suspected Baha'is who were put on trial in 1928 in Istanbul and Izmir. He was a member of the Istanbul Local Spiritual Assembly. And most importantly, he wrote 3 articles about the Baha'i faith in the journal Ijtihad of Dr. Abdullah Cevdet, which you see on the right side. Abdullah Cevdet was a physician, but more importantly, an important thinker and Westernist in the late Ottoman Empire, who was also one of the co-founders of the first Young Turk Committee in 1889. So 3 articles about the Baha'i faith. In one of the issues, also the photograph of Abdul Baha was published. So his articles were called A Scientific Study of the Baha'i Movement, where he spoke positively and emphatically about the history and tenets of Baha'ism, as he says, based on the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. And in response to those articles, on March 1922, Abdullah Cevdet published his own article in his own journal, Ijtihad, which we can translate something like the sect or doctrine of Baha'u'llah, world religion. And soon the religious authorities and the Turkish press quickly responded, accusing him of attacking the Prophet Muhammad and Islam and praising the Baha'i religion. Consequently, Cevdet was sentenced in absentia to 2 years in prison, but this never materialized. His trial lasted about 4 years, and so until the end of December 1926, but was dismissed, and the law regarding the punishment for attacking sacred matters or the crime of blasphemy was actually abolished by Ataturk due to this case, due to this Baha'i trial. As a result of this episode, the Baha'i religion was extensively discussed in Turkey, and the treatment of Abdullah Cevdet, a famous and influential figure by the religious authorities, may have strengthened Mustafa Kemal's conviction that religion must remain a private matter, and may have stimulated him to rapidly carry on his modernist reforms. Ataturk suppressed competing influences, most notably Islamic institutions and particularly reactionary mystical orders, as they were opposing modernism and a secular state with no state religion. 5 years after the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was gone, as we know, and replaced by Ataturk's secular Republic of Turkey in 1923. Especially in the Promised Day is Come, Shoghi Effendi points to this extraordinary transformation as evidence of the hand of God at work, sweeping away, as he says, the obsolete forms of Islam and preparing the way for the eventual triumph of the Baha'i faith, a slow yet steady and relentless retribution. Shoghi Effendi links this to the fall of the Qajar monarchy in Iran, and for Shoghi Effendi, the Ottoman Empire also represented Sunni Islam's encounter with the revelation of Baha'u'llah, just as Iran and the Qajar regime represented Shiism. Along the lines of providential history, Shoghi Effendi wrote about the developments during the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Republic of Turkey. In his view, the end of shameful reign, that is to say that of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, although hailed as the beginning of a more promising time, only proved to be a witness to the total collapse of the already ramshackle and worm-eaten state. These are quotations by Shoghi Effendi. Sultan Mehmed V, who reigned under the Young Turk regime, was an absolute non-entity, and incapable of improving the situation. Bahdeddin, the last of the 25 successive degenerate sultans, was no better. Shoghi Effendi blames the institutions of caliphate and sultanate as the two sinister forces of the Effete theocracy, which had inflicted upon the Baha'i religion the deadliest blows in its early developing years in the Ottoman Empire. He ascribes the overthrow to this fact, thus linking it to the divine retribution. Another statement of Shoghi Effendi in this context is the following: the edifice of the empire was now quaking and tottering to its fall. Mustafa Kemal dealt it the final blows. Turkey, that had already shrunk to a small Asiatic state, became a republic. The Sultan was deposed, the Ottoman Sultanate was ended, the rulership that had remained unbroken for 6.5 centuries was extinguished. Mustafa Kemal pursued with uncompromising and exemplary vigor, as Shoghi Effendi says, the secularization of the state. In the wake of this process, religious institutions and orders, which were the breeding grounds of political intrigue, were closed down. All were submitted to Mustafa Kemal's investigations, his dictatorial edicts, his severe judgments. Shoghi Effendi also remarks that only the Baha'is escaped the transient acts of the pitiless reformer. He calls Ataturk's swift process of secularization that aimed at a westernized and rejuvenated Turkey a momentous revolution. In one of his Persian letters, Shoghi Effendi, where he reviews the events in Turkey, he writes that a revolution beyond comparison in modern history has occurred in the heart of that land, and that the hand of divine will sent a heroic individual from among the Muslim community itself and produced a powerful person from among the Ottomans. He is of course referring to Ataturk, who with the power of his arm effaced the roots of the Ottoman dynasty, humiliated the rulers of that family, and wiped out the foundations of their invincible sovereignty and outward splendor, and brought to end the spiritual power of the caliphate. At the same time, Ataturk, in monitoring the activities of the Baha'is, was, as we will see later, to establish the independence of their religion from Islam, according to Shoghi Effendi. In this respect, the Baha'is in the first years of the Turkish Republic did not escape the policy of ceaseless vigilance of the new secular regime. They were, however, not ruthlessly persecuted. Always fearful of subversive religious groups, the Kemalists conducted a close investigation of the activities of the Baha'is in Izmir and Istanbul in 1928. It was apparently the first of its kind during which Baha'i communities were exposed to the public attention. Following the rise of secularism, or laicism as it calls in Turkey, the Turkish government on 9 October 1928 decided to order the police in the town of Izmir to conduct a close investigation into the purpose, the character, and the effects of Baha'i activity in that town. Mentioned in the morning papers the next day, the chairman of the Baha'i local spiritual assembly of Istanbul traveled to offer the necessary explanations to the authorities concerned, but he and the rest of the assembly were all arrested, and Baha'i literature in their homes was seized. However, their books were returned, and there was widespread publicity in leading newspapers of Turkey, leading to the government lifting the ban on the Baha'is in December 1928. The Istanbul Baha'is used the trial as an opportunity to expound publicly the history and teachings of the Baha'i faith, gaining considerable publicity, although in the European press. In the end, they were cleared of the charge of being a subversive organization and convicted only of the minor charge of having failed to register as an association. On the right side, you see the chairman of the Assembly of Istanbul defending the faith in court. This photo he sent actually to Martha Root later on and is archived in the National Baha'i Archives in Hawaii. As far as we know, there was a local spiritual assembly in Istanbul at least from 1926. You see the Istanbul local spiritual assembly in the photograph. on the day of the arrest, actually 7 of the 9 members. And in the letter to the left by Shoghi Effendi, dated 2nd of June 1926, Shoghi Effendi congratulates the re-election of the LSA. After the 1930s, there seemed to have been no LSAs in Turkey. Only in 1951, a new LSA was again elected in Istanbul. I will come to some of the explanations of Ruhia Khanum, the wife of Shoghi Effendi, in her biography of Shoghi Effendi, where she also quotes Shoghi Effendi. She says, in Turkey, which ever since the downfall of the Caliphate had been the subject as Shoghi Effendi wrote, of an uncompromising policy aiming at the secularization of the state and the disestablishment of Islam. Great civil reforms had taken place, reforms with this incidentally, the Baha'is were wholly in sympathy. The troubles which arose there were therefore not based on religious prejudice, but were rather brought about by the fact that the new regime had in the past discovered that so-called religious groups in Turkey had provided cover for political agitation. And when its agents found the Baha'i community was organized and was pursuing its activities openly, teaching and spreading the faith, they became suspicious and alarmed. Searched many of the believers' homes, seized any literature they found, severely cross-examined some of them, and put a good number in prison. The case brought a great deal of publicity to the faith, to some extent abroad, but mostly in the Turkish press, which reacted in favor of the Baha'is and ensured for them, when it came before the criminal tribunal on 13 December 1928, a full and impartial hearing. It marked a new departure in the unfoldment of the cause. Shoghi Effendi says, never before in Baha'i history have the followers of Baha'u'llah been called upon by the officials of a state to unfold the history and principles of their faith. Ruhia Khanum continues, it is interesting to note that in the papers seized by the authorities from the Assembly of Constantinople, the city now known as Istanbul, one of Queen Mary's tributes to the faith was found, and its implications were not lost upon the examining judges. The president of the Constantinople Baha'i Spiritual Assembly, in giving his testimony before the court, exposed in a most brilliant manner the tenets of the faith, and included this pointed quotation from Baha'u'llah's own words, "Before justice tell the truth and fear nothing." The conclusion of this entire episode was that the Baha'is had to pay a fine for having infringed the law that all associations should be registered with the government and due authorization to hold public meetings be obtained. But its results were of great significance to the faith, not only locally but abroad. What you see on the right side is from a Turkish newspaper from 9th December 28, showing Queen Mary of Romania, and the Turkish lines translates as such. So it says the trial began. What is Baha'ism supposed to be? Yesterday, those who set up a secret organization were put on trial. The suspects say that they did not set up a secret organization, and explain what Baha'ism and secrets are. And below the photo of Queen Mary it reads, as was disclosed during the trial, the Queen of Romania sent a letter to the Baha'i organization when she arrived in Istanbul. She is also a Baha'i. Ruhia Khanum continues, saying that the verdict at the court was summarized by Shoghi Effendi in a general letter to the Baha'is of the West, written on 12 February 1929. As to the verdict, it is stated clearly that although the followers of Baha'u'llah, in their innocent conception of the spiritual character of their faith, found it unnecessary to apply for leave for the conduct of their administrative activities, and have thus been made liable to the payment of a fine, yet they have, to the satisfaction of the legal representatives of the state, not only established the inculpability of the cause of Baha'u'llah, but have also worthily acquitted themselves of the task of vindicating its independence, its divine origin, and its suitability to the circumstances and requirements of the present age. Apparently, the official defense statement of the chairman Sadiq Nouri Bey, read at the court, convinced the judges to take the decision that the Baha'is were not a political group. Shoghi Effendi cites his statement in French about the essential of the Baha'i religion on that historic occasion. Shoghi Effendi adds that he was assured by a letter addressed to him by the chairman of the Istanbul Assembly that the sessions of the court were dignified in their proceedings, sublime in the presentation of the ideals of the cause, and representative in the character of their attendants. It was a declaration of the cause in all its grandeur, and never has the East seen the name of Baha resound in such a formula. So this is actually the chairman speaking or writing. I prefer to let the lawyer who is not Baha'i speak about it. Indeed, it was more effective to hear the lawyer, carried away by some mysterious impulse, shout, after quoting the principles thus: Your Honor, is this not, in short, the ideal towards which our country is presently marching, with our great Ghazi, meaning Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, at its head? In a letter dated 17 December 1928 to Shoghi Effendi, Nouri Bey emphasizes that it was through divine intervention that he could propagate the Baha'i faith among officials in Istanbul and prove that it was not a political movement. He writes, while preparing to go to the authorities to correct this misunderstanding, a Secret Service agent arrived to take me to the Chief of Police. I was questioned by a group of high officials. One would have said that it was no longer I who talked, but that Abdul Baha was defending his cause. This event is important because it was the first time that such a thing happened in an Islamic country. I felt the confirmation increase to the degree that my questioners changed their severe expression, and one of them said, "Certainly there is good in what you say. Are there books that one can read about it?" Our literature was taken to the Chief of Police. The next day, for 8 hours, I answered questions. The result of this examination proved that we had no political aims. The cause is no longer unknown in Turkey. This didn't stop here. In 1932 and 33, many Baha'is were arrested again in Istanbul, Gaziantep, Birecik, and Adana on similar charges, although in Adana the prejudices of Muslims seem to have been a factor also. By March 1933, the Istanbul Baha'is had been acquitted, but 53 Baha'is remained in prison in Adana, prompting Shoghi Effendi to ask the American and Iranian Baha'is to appeal to the Turkish authorities in their behalf. All the Baha'is were released by the beginning of April 1933. Again, Ruhia Khanum talking about this case, she says that although this was the first major episode involving the Baha'is with the new state that had evolved in Turkey after the downfall of the Caliphate, it was not to be the last. She means the event in 1928. The secular powers were constantly on their guard against reactionary forces in the state, and as the official memory was short, in 1933 there was a recrudescence of the same suspicions and accusations that had brought about the case in 1928. On 27 January, we find Shoghi Effendi cabling the American National Assembly. So this is in 1933. Baha'is Constantinople and Adana, numbering about 40, imprisoned, charged subversive motives. Urge induced Turkish Minister Washington make immediate representations. His government release law-abiding followers, non-political faith. Advise also National Assembly cable authorities, Angora, which is Ankara, and approach State Department. At the same time, he wired the Persian National Assembly. Urge immediate representations, Turkish ambassador behalf imprisoned Baha'i Istanbul and Adana, charged political motives. The next day, Shoghi Effendi wrote to a prominent Turk, His Excellency Ismet Pasha Ankara, as head of Baha'i faith, learned with amazement and grief imprisonment followers of Baha'u'llah in Istanbul and Adana. Respectfully appeal Your Excellency's intervention on behalf followers of a faith pledge loyalty to your government, for whose epochal reforms its adherents world over cherish abiding admiration. So this prominent Turk, Shoghi Effendi, cabled was Ismet İnönü, who was prime minister during Atatürk's rule, and after Atatürk died, the second president of the Republic of Turkey. Ruhiya Khanum further says that the Baha'is, familiar with the whole situation through the detailed letters the Guardian had written at the time of the previous case, immediately took action and their representations to the Turkish authorities, as well, no doubt, as moves made in Turkey to cite the verdict the criminal court have given in the former case, secured after many months of effort the release and acquittal of the believers. On 5th March, The Guardian informed the American Assembly Istanbul Friends acquitted, 53 still imprisoned. Adana urged renew energetically representations immediate release. And on 2nd of April, he cabled them Adana Friends released, advised convey appreciation Turkish ambassador. To finish my talk, again with the words of Ruhiya Khanum, she says, when we recall that this latest case in Turkey was taking place at the same time that Shoghi Effendi was struggling to obtain some rights for the faith in Persia, we get a faint idea of the number and nature of the problems he was so constantly called upon to deal with. In spite of regular recrudescence of suspicion on the part of the Turkish authorities, the Guardian was able to lay, during his own lifetime, sufficiently strong foundations in the Baha'i community of that country, meaning Turkey, for it to elect, after his passing, in fulfillment of one of his goals of the 10-year plan, its own independent National Spiritual Assembly, which was elected in 1959. In later decades, Baha'is continued to face intermittent harassment from Turkish authorities, concerned that they represented a foreign political or cultural influence, thus forcing the Turkish Baha'is to remain somewhat cautious in their public activities. As late as in 1959, during the election of the First National Spiritual Assembly on Nowruz, the meeting was raided by police and those present briefly jailed and released 2 weeks later. I will stop here and hope for questions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Najati, for this fascinating exploration of a history that you're absolutely right, I don't think any of us knew. So we will now go to questions, and I need people to raise their hands because otherwise I won't see you. So our first question is Sohail Mohajirash Jati.
Thank you very much. Well, from your previous writings, I've learned that in 2 occasions at least, the free thinkers of the Ottoman Empire, people who were sort of opposed to the Tanzimat, whether they were doing fast enough and stuff, regardless of the reason, they were banished to the penal colony of Palestine. Once at the time of Baha'u'llah, the second time, or the ones that I'm aware of from your writings, at the time of Abdul Baha, is there any indication that they were, I'm just connecting the dots now, that if they were in a small place like Palestine, they must have come in contact with at least ideas of, or the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Is there any indication that they were influenced at the two occasions that, as I said, I've learned from your previous writings. Any indication that they were influenced by the teachings of the faith? Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, as you say, I wrote elsewhere and had also presentations about it, that many, if not some, of the Ottoman thinkers were in touch with Abdul Baha, and mostly positively talked also about Abdul Baha and the Baha'is, especially the community in Ottoman Palestine. Were they influenced? That's a good question. They may have been influenced. Baha'is, Turkish Baha'is especially, like the idea that Ataturk was influenced by Baha'i ideas. We have no proof for it, but we know that he had Baha'i books in his private library. He was aware of what was, of course, going on. As I just presented to you, he knew who the Baha'is were. So during his presidency, the Baha'is were arrested. Not, as Ruhiya Khanum says, not because of religious prejudice, but because of being cautious towards religious movement that could stir political agitation. So, so the answer is not clear. He may have been influenced, or it was just the zeitgeist where he was sticking to.
Mujan.
Yes, thank you, Najati, for all the research that you've done with regard to this
Thank you, Mujan.
that you've presented here today. I'm struggling to remember because it's about 30 years ago that I was doing this research, and I may get what I'm going to say may have some of the details wrong, but as I remember it, one of the key questions in this episode that occurred at Adana in 1934, did you say? I can't remember the year. Anyway, one of the key questions was the Baha'i faith a religion, or was it an order, like a Sufi order? And if it was a Sufi order, then it would be banned under Ataturk's decrees. But if it was a religion, it would be okay. And the reason I bring that up is because I know that the British Baha'is were engaged in trying to get statements by people like Arnold Toynbee to say that this is a religion. It isn't a Sufi, or it isn't an order. It isn't. I've forgotten the two words that we used. One was mazhab and one was tariqa or something like that. And this was a critical question. And some of the statements that we have from people like Toynbee about the Baha'i faith in general, which were put out as being sort of statements, were actually as a result of these inquiries that were made, and these statements that were solicited from these people because of this situation in Turkey, and because they wanted to establish that this was a religion and not a tariqa. Does that ring any bells with you?
Yes, definitely. Like from the beginning, from 1928, it was all in the context of this persecution of these Sufi orders in Turkey. In Ataturk, he prohibited these mystical orders in 1925 already, because they were agitating people towards opposing, the modernist reforms of Mustafa Kemal. So what you are referring to is specifically in the 1950s, because this discussion of the tariqa, being a tariqa or not, because in the 1950s we have a Turkey like 2 decades after Ataturk's death, and then it was ruled by the Democratic Party, which was in favor gaining also votes from these religious orders, from the Sufi orders. And so within this context, as I mentioned in my last slide, the Baha'is in Ankara during the election of the National Spiritual Assembly were in fact arrested because the authorities thought they are tariqa, and it comes from the 1920s, but what you are referring to with Toynbee was then after 1959, where he issued these writings, and many others were asked actually by Turkish authorities. Also, some other historians and scholars of Islam were asked whether the Baha'i faith is a tariqa or a religion. But we just thank you for pointing it out. It's very important in this context.
Thank you.
Carol is next.
Thank you for this really comprehensive. Question is, you mentioned that there were no LSAs from 1930 to 1951. And I was just wondering why, since there had been LSAs previous to that time.
You mean the LSAs?
Yes.
Yes, because when in 1932-33 the Baha'is were arrested and then released, and especially after Ataturk's death in 1938, Turkey became somewhat, I would say, the spirit of fascism also came to Turkey, and especially in the 1940s, after Ataturk's death, when his friend from the military, this İsmet Pasha, was elected second president, Turkey became somewhat really closed to the outside and also very suspicious of minorities, especially the Greek, the Armenian minorities and the Jewish minority in Turkey. They were, I would not say persecuted, but there were heavy taxes put on them. And I think within this context, the Baha'is either were afraid to go on with spiritual assemblies or they were prohibited. I have to solve that. But I think it's because of this atmosphere of fear and repression. There were no LSAs until the 1950s.
So then what happened in the 1950s that changed? Was the government changed? Oh, after World War II, so the fascism died out somewhat?
Actually, yes. The government changed, yes. Until 1946, it was a one-party system in Turkey, the Republican People's Party, which Ataturk founded. And so in 1946, the ban was lifted and other parties were allowed. And then the Democratic Party, represented by someone else, won the elections in 1950. And they were open to the United States and to the West, and also, as I said, they wanted the votes from the religious minorities and so on. I guess in this context also, the Baha'is were allowed to continue their activities.
Excellent. The Yazians are next.
Say first, do you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hello, Najati. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
I hope you had a good time in Paris.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is about Paris. In Paris, Abdu'l-Baha met many pashas, either on self-exile or as diplomats or whatever reason they were here. Mm-hmm. Also in America. Did any of that reverberate back to Turkey? Did you find anything about that in the Turkish archives? There must have been some impact, because Kamal was military attaché in Paris I think in 1911 or something like that, just before the Libyan War. and he left before Abdu'l-Baha arrived. But if he was a military attaché, he still would have had his people monitoring everything in Paris. No?
Yes, but I think you asked me also before. No, unfortunately, I couldn't find anything yet. No,
Okay.
it would be awesome, of course, to find that link between Mustafa Kemal and Abdul Baha.
And any other pashas?
Pardon me?
And the other government and the other government officials who are in Paris? Nothing.
Not so far. No. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Gershon.
Thanks. And thank you, Najati, for a great
Hi,
lecture. It was
Gershon.
very
Hi,
interesting, as everyone has said. You're exploring some relatively uncharted ground, so it's very interesting. I just wanted to offer maybe more of a supporting comment, and that is, I do think that especially this episode that you described, which sounds to me like something very worth exploring even much further about this arrest, the imprisonment, etc. It really does seem to go against the backdrop of what was going on in Turkey at the time, because, you know, there is this extreme program of secularization that really begins right around this time, right? He has this, famous speech, right, in 27, right? And then in 28, the alphabet change, and so many other, I think also the constitution changed in 28 too, to remove Islam as the state religion or official religion.
Actually, in 28.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's the same, but then it does raise the question of whether the Baha'is are being seen as another Sufi or some sort of other Islamic group. And that's why they're being investigated. And then, once it's made clear later on, perhaps it's a little bit open. But that's why I would say I have a similar question. If I'm wondering if there's any, because it is a court case, if there must be a good deal of documentary evidence that would indicate what those who were prosecuting the Baha'is were thinking, right? I think you mentioned on your slide, it was blasphemy. And then the trial, and then of course he said Jevdet's trial was canceled. This is what Ataturk then. So I'm wondering, is there any evidence regarding this? How the Turkish officials were thinking? And then later on, when you mentioned in the coming toward the 40s after Inunu becomes president, and you mentioned the Varlık Vergisi, right? This tax that was applied to the Jewish and to a lesser degree Armenian minorities. Were Baha'is affected by this as well? I wonder. The community was probably much smaller and perhaps held less capital than these other religious communities. But I wonder if they also suffered directly from this capital tax. So these are just some questions, just to see against the backdrop of what's going on in Turkey. And then, of course, I completely agree, right? 50, Menderes comes to power, and there's this opening of religious discourse in Turkey. And that seems to be very logical that then it would be kind of an open avenue for the Baha'is. But then I would wonder, was there any sort of retreat from that after the military intervention in 1960, when religious discourse was again limited? Did that affect the Baha'i? So these are just some questions I'm thinking in terms of the broader scope of Turkish history.
Thank you very much. Should I reply to this, or
if you have answers, I'd be happy. But of course, if not, yeah.
Well, you see, this is what I'm trying to gather together for an upcoming book, hopefully. But yet, it's all in the context of the political developments of Turkey, of course. I mean, the Turkish Baha'i community has always been very cautious. And, the funny thing, if I may call it like that, it's like until the early 2000s, it was the military that was suspicious of the Baha'is because of this harsh secularization, and always also vigilant of reactionary forces and so on. And then with this current government, actually, which you may call Islamist or whatever, Islamic, the arrest stopped in Turkey. The arrest of Baha'is stopped completely in Turkey. If you can wonder why, but I would say it's either pressure from outside, because I remember when Obama was elected, that was in 2008-9, right? The first country he visited was Egypt, where he did this great talk, and then he went to Turkey. And then I saw a newspaper clipping exactly when he was in Turkey, which said Obama has the Baha'is in his files. So he came with the Baha'i file to Turkey. And then from that point on, actually, the government, which had confiscated properties in Edirne, for example, gave it back to the Baha'is. Or like the EU put some pressure on the Turkish government, and then other properties were given back to Turkey. So we can speculate, but it's interesting to see these dynamics, military and then now the Islamic establishment, and whether it's for the good or for the bad. I forgot your first question. I'm sorry if you.
The trial documentation of the trial, especially the prosecute. These I'm sure more than one trial. So any documentation of the state side, the prosecutor's side.
No, I haven't found anything. I did quite not know where to look. There must be files, I assume, in the Republican archives in Ankara. So and not everything is online. So one has to go to Ankara probably. Actually, the files also, like the trial was in Istanbul, and so I don't know if they were transferred, but my guess is they're in Ankara. So we would have a clear picture of actually, as you said, of the officials and their views about the Baha'is, and then, as you also rightly mentioned, in the 1950s, with Menderes coming to power and giving some leverage to the religious groups. And it's very important, and thank you for pointing it out again. Thank you, Gershon.
Thanks. It was a great talk.
So we have a question that's in the chat, which is, do you have any thoughts about the arrest of Baha'is in Ankara in the 1950s?
Yes, I haven't come so far, but there are memoirs by Turkish Baha'is, which I just mentioned. I think the question is from a Turkish Baha'i lady in America, as far as I'm concerned. So there are many there are memoirs of Turkish Baha'is about detailed descriptions of these trials in 1959. Also, many Turkish newspapers about that, but I haven't gone through all of them.
Okay. Next, Bektash in Germany.
Bektash. Hi, Bektash.
Hi, thank you very much, dear friends. Najati, there was a question, I think 2 questions ago, where a friend asked, and you said, for now, you didn't find any direct link from writing or letter from Atatürk to Abdul Baha. So I read in one of the books of a Turkish Baha'i friend introducing the Baha'i faith. I think he's also here in the group, Mr. Mehmet Marufi. He's mentioning a letter from Forel, Professor August Forel, to Atatürk.
Yes.
After the letter from Abdul Baha that we know, the letter to Forel, Forel seems to be very convinced, and he's. Did you find anything about this in the archives, that there is a official letter from Forel to Atatürk, where Forel is very gently Atatürk to introduce the Baha'i faith as a second religion,
yes,
as I remember, yeah?
Yes, in fact, I mentioned this in my book, the first book, the revised PhD thesis. And if you like, I can read it for you. So, where am I? Do you see the letter? Okay, so I guess you all see my screen.
No,
so this is Auguste Forel, this famous Swiss scientist who had also received a tablet from Abdul Baha, and also so he was so enthusiastic about the reforms of Ataturk, and after having read this famous speech by Ataturk in 1927, he wrote to Ataturk, and this letter is in the archives of the university in Lausanne in the Switzerland, among the papers of Forel. So he says, "Your Excellency, if I'm so audacious as to write you directly, it is because I read in our Droit du Peuple a résumé of your splendid talk during 6 days, 3 hours each morning and each afternoon. This résumé fired me with enthusiasm. In addition, a progressive newspaper of Istanbul published about 2 years ago an impartial Turkish translation of an article in German which I had written in the Neue Freie Presse of Vienna about the Baha'is who were even praised. This is what encouraged me to write to you. I'm sending you herewith the 12 Baha'i principles. This religion was founded in Iran around 1852 and has over 1 million followers. I draw your attention to the principles 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 9. Thus, if you were to declare the Baha'i faith as an official religion of Turkey, in addition to Islam, you would make a great step towards progress and would give an example to all Europe and even to all the nations of the world. And such an example would be followed. You have but to write to Shogh Effendi in Haifa or have someone write on your behalf. Amen." So this is the letter of Forel to Ataturk. We don't know if Ataturk ever replied. So this is what Bektaş was referring to.
Fabulous.
Yes.
The next question comes from Nasreen.
Thank you, Najati. Wonderful presentation,
Thank you,
and thank you for the wonderful questions. Just following in the same topic regarding the relationship between Abdul Baha and Turkish intellectuals, because I'm trying to track down the period of Abdul Baha and his relationship with intellectuals. And I know during the eulogies, during the funeral of Abdul Baha, there were many eulogies from Muslims, Druze, and even Jewish, Arabic speaking especially. So I was wondering if there is any survey of the names of intellectuals that Abdul Baha had, Turkish intellectuals that Abdul Baha had contact with, and if there is any correspondence with them or any kind of summary or writings regarding this topic.
Yes, I write about that in my book, actually, in my first book, Ottoman Intellectuals Contact with especially Abdul Baha. So, my book is online as PDF. I can send the link later if you like.
Yes, thank you. I have seen that, but I was wondering if you have discovered anything new and
anything new
in addition to the stuff you already published.
Anything new? Not really. No. I'm always searching, but no. The best thing would be, of course, the link between Ataturk and Abdul Baha, but so far nothing.
Well, just keep looking, all of us.
Yes, I'm doing. Thank you.
So I'm about to call on Mina, and then before Sohail gets a chance to ask a second question, I want to address the students. There's a number of Hebrew University students here, and I think maybe some students from an Italian university. So after Mina and before Sohail, we're going to have a pause to give the university students a chance to decide if they really do want to ask a question. But Mina's next.
Thank you. Najati, thank you so much for this interesting talk.
Thank you, Mina.
I want to repeat what Dr. Etemad has asked you in the chat box, because I'm also very interested to know what the situation of the Baha'i community in Turkey is right now. Has there been any changes compared to pre-Erdogan time?
As I said, the Baha'is have been always cautious because of the dynamics in Turkey and the Middle East. I mean, they freely meet, they have institute activities, there's no problem as such, even now under Erdogan. But they're cautious. There are no summer schools, winter schools anymore. But as far as I know, for decades, the Office of Public Information in Turkey, in Ankara, was always in good relationship with any government in Turkey. And they were well known. They are well known. Now the Erdogan regime also knows they are not political. And I think that the problem in Turkey is that as soon you are political, you're opposing the state or the government. So let's hope the best, and it will stay like that. I think Turkey is the only Islamic country so far where Baha'is are really like freely enjoying their activities as well. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hebrew University.
Bruchim habayim. Any questions?
All right, you have one more chance after Sohail. Sohail, go ahead.
Please.
Thank you. Dr. Alkan, you showed pictures of dervishes, Sufis, that I read that at the time of Baha'u'llah, because people, according to my understanding, they were sympathetic to the teachings of the cause. They were encouraged by Baha'u'llah to actually travel throughout the Ottoman territory and teach the faith. And this practice actually, and I remember having read that once a year they actually got together in the presence of Baha'u'llah, and there's a special tablet for that night that they did celebrate it in the presence of Baha'u'llah. And this practice, I read that continued until in the ministry of Abdul Baha. Yes. Do you have any information when it was, and Abdul Baha actually put a stop to this practice of the dervishes and stuff, long before the question became at the time of Ataturk and the opposition to Sufis or dervishes. Do you have any information? What date Abdul Baha decides not to continue this practice and why?
Not that I know. I don't know if Mina knows or Hujan. I don't know actually, no. But I know for sure that with Shogh Effendi everything changed. I mean, like religion being really independent, but I didn't know about this by Abdul Baha.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yes, I would like to ask if we know about any relation of the early Baha'i community in Turkey with Jewish or Christian communities.
Yes. I think I have mentioned that in these first two communities in the southeast, Birecik and Gaziantep, there were also Armenian Baha'is, like Armenians becoming Baha'is from very early on. We have later we have a member of the Istanbul local spiritual assembly, an Armenian member of the LSA, a doctor, a physician. And I know from the 1950s, I think in the, again, like re-elected new LSA of Istanbul, there was also a Baha'i of Jewish background. I forgot his name for now, but I know there were few Jewish Baha'is as well in Turkey.
And was there any connection with the leadership of the Christian Church, Orthodox, or the Jewish communities, or it was also only like individuals that joined the Baha'i?
I think it was individual. I don't know of any bigger connections.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat regarding whether you have any project related to correcting misunderstandings in the West about the true nature of Islam.
Well, I mean, if I'm going to write my book about the Baha'i community in Turkey, I have to refer to Shoge Effendi and his view of Islam or the Islamic institutions. So yes, this is an important part of the project, I think. And we can point it out anywhere. Shoge Effendi says, talk about Islam in Baha'i summer schools. And so I think it's one of the duties of the Baha'is to correct this misunderstanding about Islam. There may be other views by other friends here.
We probably have time for one more question. So the person who's been holding back with a question in their mind and hasn't asked it, now is the moment. All right, that person is me. And my question is, you showed us this fascinating picture of the Dervish Baha'is, and then you showed us, a few stars, people who were starred as Turks. But then once you're talking about 50 people are being arrested or large numbers being arrested, has the ethnic composition of the community changed by the time those arrests are happening? And if so, what was it that opened up the community?
You mean like the composition, like being Iranians and then Turks?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Well, there are still descendants of those early Iranian Baha'is in Turkey who are completely naturalized. They don't know any Persian, So we have also some Iranian Baha'is, like I have here Mr. Farhangit, for example, who came from Iran, who still speaks Persian. And so, but like these early Baha'is in the 19th and early 20th century, their descendants are now Turkish, and the whole Turkish Baha'i community, if you leave out the many Iranian Baha'i refugees in Turkey, they're almost only Turkish. So very few Iranians, and I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. So I think the time has come for me to thank you, Najati, for a fascinating lecture. You have done an excellent job of convincing us to look for your books that we haven't read, to go online and find what we can find there of your writing.
Thank you so much.
And to eagerly await the one that's coming. But also we want to thank Meir for organizing this intellectual feast, and Uval for doing the cooking along with Najati. So thank you, Meir, Uval, Najati, for a really wonderful talk. But I want to hand it back to Meir in case there are announcements.
Thank you so much.
You're muted, Meir.
Thank you very much, Najati, for your excellent lecture.
Thank you, Meir.
The discussions that followed. It is always fascinating to hear your excellent
Thank you so
lectures.
much.
I just want to make only one announcement regarding our next meeting. We don't yet have a date. It will be sometime in April, and we know that it will be devoted to the translation into Arabic of the book on Abdel Baha by Joshua Lincoln that has been translated by Nesrine Akhtar Khabari, who is with us, and it is going to print in the next few weeks, and by then it will come out, and we will devote, like we did for the English and for the Hebrew, we'll do the same for the English. So you will receive the date and the program of this. It will not be
everything is so well organized.
Probably a panel of a discussion devoted to the book.
Meir, not everyone can hear you.
You don't hear me?
Not really.
Okay. I can't do anything more about this. So I just said that our next meeting will be devoted to the book of Nesrine in April, sometime in April, after her book has come out.
Oh,
Thank
wonderful.
you very much.
When does it come out?
It will come out in, I think, no more than 2 months, I estimate. What do you think, Nesrine?
Mabruk.
Inshallah.
Yes, we are done. We've been done for a while, and we are working on making it perfect with the guidance and help of Meir. Hopefully, it will be out very, very soon.
Wonderful.
We're just finalizing the contract to get it published.
Thank you.
Much, everybody.
Thank you so much.